And thanks for making that video. For everyone else, I asked my friend Jonathan Fisk, whose YouTube channel is RevFiskJ, I'll put a link to, look at a particular clip of video from the ELCA assembly. Now, the clip is of an apology and a response to the apology of the ELCA to the African Descent Lutherans Association or something like that. And the reason why I need help, I wanted Jonathan's help looking at this because I've been studying the ELCA. I was making a video on the differences. I wanted to make sure that was accurate. So I've been watching the ELCA assembly, and my kind of first wave of attack with the doctrine of the ELCA is that they miss the doctrine of the law, and yet I think they can rightly respond to me and say, Brian, no, that's not right. We do preach the law, and sure enough, there's a lot of law that's preached at the ELCA and at their assembly, but it's a different sort of law. There's all sorts of resolutions, for example, condemning the sin of patriarchy, or condemning the sin of systemic racism or systemic sexism and xenophobia and this kind of thing. It's systemic sin. And what I'm trying to figure out is what happens when your chief doctrine of the law, when your chief preaching of the law is against this kind of systemic sin. I think something happens, because we know that the preaching of the gospel is shaped by your preaching of the law. If your preaching of the law is that man is just sick, then the gospel is going to be that Jesus comes and heals you, rather than understanding that the law makes us dead and the gospel gives us new life. And I think that happens as well when the preaching of the law becomes the preaching of this systemic sin, then it diminishes the gospel. And I think in this particular clip, we'll put a link to it as well. You can just watch it. It's 20 minutes or whatever. That happens because you have this apology for the systemic racism of the ELCA, and then you see the response, which is not the absolution. And that's a key moment, and I will hone in on this conversation. But Jonathan, thank you for looking at it. You confirmed a couple of things for me, and then I think something that, because you didn't go farther in the video, you missed. Number one, you noted, because you were looking at the opening prayer, you noticed how you couldn't tell if it was like a sermon or a prayer. Like the guy didn't have his eyes closed. It didn't seem like it was a liturgical prayer. At least it was half speech, half prayer. And that kind of keys into something I've been noticing with the convention, and that is that there's a human centricity to the theology that's shaped up in the ELCA. So, for example, and I'm working on a video on this that has to do with the interfaith conversation. They say we can't be sure about what God says about people of other religions, but it's never what does God say about other gods. In other words, it's just an anthropocentric kind of theological approach that I think is showing up liturgically in that prayer, which you've noticed. The other thing that you helped me see, and I don't know why I didn't make this connection, but I'm grateful that you, when I was watching your video, this just the clarity, is that this is simply the next step of liberation theology and the social gospel. So it's this kind of Marxist interpretation of history that there's different classes of people that are oppressed by the various different oppressors, and the gospel is being set free from oppression. So sin is understood in terms of oppression, and I think that's going to be part of the clue to understanding the systemic sin is part of the oppression. The third thing is you were asking who's being condemned by this preaching of the Isaiah the prophet, and they are condemning themselves. They're not standing there pointing the finger at other people like the Missouri Synod or you or me or whatever. They are saying that we, the ELCA, have had a problem with systemic racism, that minority pastors have had less money for equal work, they've had worse calls than white pastors and things like this. And so they are confessing their own sin. They're not confessing someone else's sin, which I suppose is good. It's better to confess your own sin than someone else's. But still, there's a way that this idea of systemic sin defers sin. And I'm starting to hone in on it. So Jonathan, I'd like you, and if anyone watching wants to kind of help, you can watch this video and see, help with this question, because I think what systemic sin does is the difference between the doctrine of systemic sin and original sin is that systemic sin is out there, while original sin is in here. Systemic sin means that systemic sin is healed by revolution or reparation, while original sin is healed by redemption. And so I think this idea of systemic sin, of seeing sin in the structures of the world rather than seeing sin kind of embedded in my own corrupt human heart, is going to then reshape the gospel. And I think you'll see that in the response to the confession as well. So thanks for engaging. I'm going to toss it back to you with hopefully that clarified question, and you can take a look at the video. That's cool how you can put the video and respond. Someday I'll have a grown-up computer that can do that as well. Thanks for jumping in, and if anyone else has comments, you can comment below as well.